But let me raise another matter here, something that has not been discussed elsewhere. But it is about the potential for political interference by the president, by the president's closest advisors, on the Trump-Russia investigation. This one does not start in Washington, does not start at the White House. This one starts where all the meatiest information about this presidency and this scandal starts, which is in the aggressive free press that we are blessed with in this country. Okay? This spring, the Associated Press had two great scoops about the man who was the chairman of the Trump campaign during the time that Trump won the Republican primaries and collected the nomination. Paul Manafort was the chairman, right? He was the chairman through the spring and summer of 2016. Incidentally, when many of the meetings and contacts that are reported to be of interest to investigators allegedly happened between Trump associates and Russian officials. The first big AP scoop this spring on Paul Manafort landed on March 22nd. AP exclusive. Before Trump job, Manafort worked to aid Putin. Quote, before signing up with Donald Trump, Paul Manafort secretly worked for a Russian billionaire with a plan to greatly benefit the Putin government. In 2005, Manafort proposed in a confidential strategy plan that he would influence politics, business dealings, and news coverage inside the United States, Europe, and former Soviet republics to benefit President Vladimir Putin's government. Manafort's pitch memo for this contract said, quote, we are now of the belief that this model can greatly benefit the Putin government if employed at the correct levels with the appropriate commitment to success. Quoting from the AP, quote, Manafort pitched the plans to a Russian billionaire, a close Putin ally, with whom Manafort eventually signed a $10 million annual contract beginning in 2006. So that was the AP's first big scoop on Paul Manafort this spring, which happened in March. I remember when that story broke, I was in a cab on my way to work, and I laughed out loud when I read it on my phone, and I read the headline and the lead of the story out loud to the cab driver who was driving me, and he turned around like this with the wheel and looked at me. I was like, no! It was almost the death of me, literally. But that was Paul Manafort in March. Starting in 2006, ending who knows when, Donald Trump's campaign chairman had an annual contract to promote the interests of Vladimir Putin's government in countries around the world, including the United States. Right? Woo! Boom, from the Associated Press. That was in March. Then 3 weeks later, they had this one, AP exclusive. Manafort firm received Ukraine ledger payment. Now, this one didn't cause any cab drivers to drive off the road. This one did not have the same hair on fire effect as the on a contract to help Putin story, but this one ended up being really important. This one closed the loop on the story that actually got Paul Manafort bounced off the Trump campaign in the first place. It was the New York Times back in August of last year who reported that Paul Manafort appeared on a secret ledger in Ukraine of what appeared to be earmarked payments from the Ukrainian dictator and his party, who Manafort had worked for and who essentially looted that country's treasury during his time in office. New York Times reported last August that Paul Manafort was listed on this ledger of alleged secret payments from the kleptocratic dictator of Ukraine. And after the New York Times reported his name appearing on that ledger, Manafort was gone from the Trump campaign less than a week later. He denied ever receiving those payments, but they ousted him from the campaign. That was August. It took until April. It took a few months, but the Associated Press eventually reported that Manafort wasn't just on the ledger, earmarked to receive payments. AP reported in April that he did take those payments. And that ends up being important for where we are now, because there have been all sorts of reports since Paul Manafort mysteriously left the Trump campaign. There have been all sorts of reports that Manafort's money trail all over the world is proving to be very interesting to investigators. NBC's own Richard Engel, you might remember, went to Cyprus and was told in Cyprus that that country's unit for combating money laundering in Cyprus had handed over information on Paul Manafort's money to the U.S. Treasury's Financial Crimes Unit. There have been multiple reports that Paul Manafort has also ended up in the middle of an FBI investigation in Ukraine that's basically an investigation of that country being a kleptocracy. It's an investigation trying to find out what happened to all the money that Manafort's client stole from the government of that country. Where'd all the money go? There's an FBI investigation into that. Manafort has been reported to be tied up in that investigation. So Manafort's money trail He denies all wrongdoing related to any of his overseas payments, any of his overseas political work. But multiple reports over multiple months suggest that Paul Manafort's international money trail is like life's rich pageant for investigators. And when that simple AP story came out in April about him allegedly getting paid out of Ukraine, that story hit a nerve. Right? There's been all sorts of stories about his money, but this allegation about his payments out of Ukraine, that's what led him to quit the Trump campaign last August. And then AP story in April that the payments actually happened, that led him to do this. That same day the AP story came out, this story was everywhere. Paul Manafort expected to register as foreign agent. Manafort to register as foreign agent. Manafort is now registering as a foreign agent. And at the time that happened in April, it made some waves, right? I mean, you know, critics of the Trump administration chewed on that, right? I mean, here's yet another senior person from the Trump campaign registering retroactively as an agent of a foreign power. Mike Flynn had to register retroactively as a foreign agent after he resigned as national security advisor. And now the Trump campaign chairman, Paul Manafort, had to do it too. Amazing story. Except here's the thing. Manafort never did it. You can search yourself to see who is registered as a foreign agent. It's a good little form. I have it bookmarked on my phone. It's mobile friendly. I do it every day. Every day I type into the search box, Manafort, search. And there is nothing new. Everybody thinks he registered as a foreign agent like Mike Flynn did. Manafort never registered. And here's why this is important. Investigations need source material, right? Investigators need evidence. They need open source material that they dig up on their own. They need data and documents that they pry out of various agencies and out of individuals by various means. They may need intercepts and stuff like that, particularly if it's a cloak and dagger investigation involving espionage, you know, foreign intelligence or something. But really, what they need, really what they desperately want, are witnesses, cooperating witnesses. People who were close enough or high-ranking enough, well-placed enough that they know what happened. And crucially, those people have to be willing to talk. They have to be willing to testify about what they witnessed. And in any investigation, cooperating witnesses often need incentive, right? Why would anybody turn against these people who they were close to now that those people are potentially in trouble, right? If you're close enough to these folks that you saw stuff that's now being investigated and potentially prosecuted, why would you turn against those people? Why would you turn against these people who you used to be involved with? I mean, in this case, any people who were high-ranking in the Trump campaign, they're generally going to be pro-Trump, right? I mean, why would they become cooperating witnesses in an investigation of the Trump campaign? They wouldn't unless they had a real incentive to do it, a real reason to testify. And oftentimes, the threat of prosecution is that reason. That's the incentive. Hey, we got something on you, and we're going to prosecute you for it unless you tell us what you know. That's the general pattern that investigators pursue, especially in big, sprawling cases like this, right? So when Mike Flynn had his lawyer come out and say, Mike Flynn has a story to tell and he would like to tell it, remember that? Certainly, General Flynn has a story to tell and he would very much like to tell it. Remember that statement from Flynn's lawyer? That was couched with a request for immunity from prosecution for Mike Flynn. Today in the Atlantic magazine, you could see the White House spilkis about that. Quote, I think he, meaning President Trump, is worried about Mike Flynn, said one source close to the White House. Trump has questioned whether or not he should have fired Flynn. They don't know what Flynn's going to say. When Flynn did retroactively register as an agent of a foreign power after he was fired, that was a sign that it wasn't like, oh, he slipped his mind that he'd been an agent of a foreign power before. No, that was a sign that he was talking to the Department of Justice. Right, the Department of Justice has jurisdiction over the Foreign Agent Registration Act. That was a sign that he was talking to the Department of Justice with attention to his own legal misbehavior in terms of representing foreign governments without previously registering like he was supposed to do. And Mike Flynn registered, and everybody thinks Paul Manafort registered, but Manafort did not. In a statement, Paul Manafort said he had consulted with federal authorities and had received formal guidance from those federal authorities. The relevant federal authorities here, again, would be the Department of Justice. They oversee the Foreign Agent Registration Act. Paul Manafort never registered, apparently thanks to the guidance he got from federal authorities. Federal authorities told him not to register? You're fine, you're okay, buddy, don't worry about it. I mean, given what's been widely reported about him and his money, you think he might really have to be worried about it. I mean, anything that can be used to prosecute a witness can be used as pressure on that witness to flip. But in Paul Manafort's case, the Department of Justice appears to be alleviating that pressure on him, not tightening it down. And it is happening very quietly. Again, everybody thinks they made him retroactively register as a foreign agent. They did not. Now, the head of the Justice Department is Attorney General Jeff Sessions.